They didn't come for money. They came for us.
My name's Mike Davidson, and 15 years ago, I made the decision to walk away from military intelligence work to build something legitimate and stable in Seattle. I'd spent years doing things in dark places that most people would never know existed, and I wanted out. I wanted to give my wife Sarah and our kids the kind of stable, normal life I never had growing up in the foster care system, bouncing between homes. I founded Davidson Security Consulting with a guy named David Walsh, someone I met through industry contacts who seemed to share my vision of building a reputable firm based on integrity, quality work, and doing things the right way. For over a decade, everything went smoothly and according to plan. We landed solid government contracts, built an excellent reputation in the Pacific Northwest, made good money without compromising our principles. Sarah worked as a pediatric nurse at the Swedish Medical Center downtown, saving kids' lives and coming home with stories that reminded me why stability mattered. Our son Tommy was 14, sharp as a tack and way too perceptive for his own good, the kind of kid who noticed everything and remembered details most adults would miss. Our daughter Emma was 8 years old, full of boundless energy and constantly drawing pictures of our family doing normal family things. We had achieved the American dream, or so I thought. I'd built exactly what I'd set out to create, a life worth living, a family worth protecting, a future worth investing in. About 6 months before everything imploded and my world turned upside down, David started changing in ways that made my instincts scream warnings. He pushed aggressively for expansion into new markets, wanted us to lowball bids to win contracts even if it meant compromising quality, suggested taking on clients that made every alarm bell in my head ring loudly. We built our reputation on being selective, on only taking work we could do with excellence. But David seemed fixated on growth charts and profit margins above everything else. Every time I questioned his judgment or pushed back on questionable decisions, he'd flash that practice corporate smile and talk smoothly about thinking bigger, about strategy and aggressive expansion, about not being left behind by competitors. The arguments between us became more frequent, and I started noticing something cold flickering in his eyes when I opposed his plans. Something that reminded me of people I dealt with during my intelligence days. Sarah never warmed to David from the beginning, which I'd initially attributed to her incredibly sharp instincts about people that came from years of working with families in crisis at the hospital. She had this ability to read people that was almost supernatural, and she'd visibly tense up whenever David visited for dinner or came by the house for any reason. Emma, with the brutal honesty of 8-year-olds everywhere, would announce loudly that Mom didn't like Mr. Walsh, which was embarrassing during business dinners, but completely accurate. Tommy would watch David carefully during these visits, studying him with those analytical eyes like he was trying to solve a complex equation that didn't quite add up correctly, like there were variables that didn't make mathematical sense. I started noticing small financial discrepancies in accounts David managed exclusively without my oversight or involvement. Nothing I could definitively prove in a courtroom, just patterns that felt wrong when I reviewed quarterly statements. Money moving through shell companies that didn't seem to have legitimate business purposes, expenses that didn't match up with actual work performed or contracts delivered, clients who seemed more interested in accessing our security credentials and government clearances than our actual consulting services or security expertise. I'd spent years in military intelligence learning to trust those gut feelings, those instincts that screamed when something was off, even if you couldn't immediately articulate why, and something was definitely wrong here. The numbers told a story I didn't want to believe about my business partner. So, I reached out to Jack Morrison, my old Marine buddy who now ran a successful private investigation firm down in Portland, Oregon. We'd served together in intelligence operations across 3 continents, trusted each other with our lives in places and situations that would never appear in any official records or government documents. When Jack sent me an urgent encrypted message asking to meet in person immediately, I knew it was serious. Jack didn't reach out unless something was very, very wrong, and he definitely didn't ask for face-to-face meetings unless the situation was too sensitive for electronic communication. We met at our regular coffee spot near Pike Place Market on a gray Seattle morning. The place was crowded enough for privacy, which Jack always preferred for sensitive conversations about matters that shouldn't be overheard. He arrived exactly on time because Marines don't break certain habits no matter how many years have passed since they left the service, and I could see the worry etched on his face immediately, which put me on edge before he even opened his mouth to speak. Jack slid a thin manila folder across the table between our coffee cups and told me about an FBI agent friend from his Army days, a woman named Maria Chen, who'd asked him to quietly and unofficially look into David Walsh's activities and associations. David's name had initially popped up in a federal investigation peripherally, just mentioned in passing during surveillance of other targets. But then things escalated and got more serious very quickly. There were shipping manifests that didn't match actual cargo weights when inspected, warehouse leases under shell companies that had no legitimate business purpose or visible operations, regular meetings with some genuinely dangerous people who had extensive criminal records and active federal investigations. Jack showed me photographs that made my blood run cold. David shaking hands with Ricardo Martinez, a known arms dealer with extensive ties to South American pill cartels and revolutionary groups. Another photo showed David meeting privately with Frank Pierce, a senior Port Authority official currently under federal investigation for corruption, bribery, and facilitating smuggling operations. There were surveillance shots showing David entering warehouses at odd hours, coordinating with people who were definitely not legitimate security clients. My stomach dropped as I looked through the evidence, seeing my business partner's face in compromising situation after compromising situation. Then Jack told me the absolute worst part of the investigation. 2 weeks earlier, a whistleblower had been scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury about illegal weapons shipments moving through Seattle ports using falsified documentation. The guy died in a single car accident the night before his scheduled testimony, which would have blown the whole operation wide open. Brake line failure on a well-maintained vehicle. Local traffic investigators had ruled it accidental after a cursory investigation, but Agent Chen wasn't convinced at all and was quietly pushing for a more thorough forensic examination. Everything clicked together into horrible focus, like a puzzle I'd been staring at without seeing the actual picture. Every suspicious decision David had made, every questionable client he'd pushed me toward accepting, every time he'd argued passionately for expansion into areas that felt fundamentally wrong, every instance where he'd wanted to cut corners on security protocols we'd established. David had been systematically using our security consulting firm as perfect cover for international weapons trafficking operations. We had government credentials, federal security clearances, legitimate business operations that could facilitate moving illegal shipments through secure facilities without raising immediate suspicion. Our reputation opened doors that would be closed to obvious criminals. Jack warned me seriously that these people didn't play around or show mercy. If David suspected I was investigating him or knew about his illegal operations, I could easily end up like that whistleblower with the failed brake lines. But I refused to walk away and abandon what I'd spent 15 years building from nothing. I told Jack I'd handle this carefully and methodically, gather concrete evidence that would stand up in court before making any moves that would expose my investigation. That afternoon, I returned to the office and watched through glass conference room walls as David met with what his calendar described as a potential client. Though I knew better now. The guy he was talking to wore an expensive tailored suit that probably cost $5,000. But he couldn't hide his criminal bearing or the prison tattoos I glimpsed on his wrists when he gestured. I'd seen enough bad actors during my intelligence days across multiple continents to recognize one immediately, to spot the tells that separated legitimate businessmen from predators. Later that day, while I was sitting in my car outside the office building trying to process everything Jack had shown me, Tommy called my cell phone. He asked casually when I'd be home from work, mentioned they were having tacos for dinner, which was his favorite meal. Then he paused in that way he did when something was bothering him, and he mentioned something about that thing I always told him, about trusting your gut instincts even when you couldn't articulate exactly why something felt wrong. He explained he'd seen David's distinctive black Mercedes parked across from our house during lunch hour, while Sarah was at the hospital working her shift. David had just sat there motionless for about 10 minutes watching our house, then drove away without getting out or making contact with anyone. Ice ran through my veins hearing that information. David was conducting surveillance on my family, watching our home, studying our patterns and vulnerabilities. That meant either he suspected I knew something about his operations and was assessing the threat level I represented, or worse, he was preparing for something, gathering intelligence for an operation against us. Either scenario was absolutely terrifying when you understood what men like David were capable of doing when they felt threatened or cornered. I called Jack immediately from my car and told him what Tommy had observed. Jack's voice was grim when he responded that this was reconnaissance, professional threat assessment, the kind of thing you did before launching an operation. We needed to know David's intentions fast before he made his move. I asked Jack for immediate access to everything Agent Chen had on David, every piece of evidence and intelligence they'd gathered. I also needed surveillance on David starting immediately. 24/7 coverage. Every move he made, every phone call he placed, every meeting he attended. That night after the kids were in bed, I didn't tell Sarah the full details about David's surveillance of our home because I wouldn't frighten her until I understood the complete scope of the threat we were facing. Instead, I installed additional security cameras around our property covering every approach, checked every door and window lock twice, and moved my service weapon from the gun safe in the basement to my nightstand, where I could reach it in seconds. Tommy noticed the changes because nothing got past that kid's observational skills. He asked me directly if we were okay, if there was danger. I looked into my son's eyes and promised him we were okay, that we'd stay safe. But internally, I was lying awake at night knowing promises meant absolutely nothing against men like David Walsh, who would eliminate without hesitation when their empires were threatened. 3 nights later, everything changed forever in ways I never could have anticipated. Tommy couldn't sleep because he had an important AP history essay due the next day about Cold War espionage tactics, ironically relevant given what was about to happen. He'd been researching at his desk when he heard voices outside at 2 a.m, male voices speaking quietly. Voices definitely didn't belong in our quiet suburban neighborhood at that hour when everyone should be sleeping. He crept carefully to his bedroom window and looked out at the street below. 2 dark SUVs were parked 3 houses down with engines running but lights completely off, which was immediately suspicious. 4 men emerged from the vehicles, and even from that distance and limited lighting, Tommy could see they weren't police officers or security guards. Wrong tactical gear, wrong movement patterns, wrong everything. My son had grown up around my military buddies visiting for barbecues, heard enough operational stories to recognize professional operators when he saw them. These men moved with lethal purpose and precision toward our house, and Tommy understood instantly we were the target. Tommy didn't hesitate or second-guess what he was seeing. He ran quietly to my bedroom and shook me awake, whispering urgently that we had to go right now, that armed men were outside approaching the house with obvious hostile intent. I was alert instantly with muscle memory from years of dangerous situations, brain shifting immediately into tactical mode. I didn't question his assessment or ask for detailed explanations. I trusted my son's judgment completely because I'd spent years teaching him to be absolutely certain before sounding alarms, to distinguish real threats from false positives. I told Tommy quickly to get his sister from her room while I grabbed my go bag that was always packed and ready for emergency situations, along with my weapon and extra magazines. Sarah was already pulling on clothes with efficient movements, her nurse training making her calm and capable during crisis situations when seconds mattered. When Tommy woke Emma gently, she was confused and frightened by the sudden urgency, but I lifted her carefully and told her in my calmest voice that we were going on an adventure. But we needed to be very, very quiet, like we were playing a game. She nodded against my shoulder, trusting me completely the way children trust their parents to keep them safe from harm. We moved through the dark house without turning on any lights that would silhouette us as targets. Through the kitchen window, I spotted a dark figure approaching the back door with weapon drawn. We had maybe 30 seconds before they breached entry and started clearing rooms. The family moved quickly through the garage into my Tahoe SUV. I'd always backed it into the garage for exactly this kind of emergency situation, for rapid departure without having to execute vulnerable reversing maneuvers. We all strapped in silently with practiced efficiency, and I started the engine immediately, pulling out into the street before the automatic garage door had fully opened. Tommy told me urgently to look back at our house right now, pointing through the rear window. My heart stopped completely. In the upstairs window of Tommy's bedroom, I could see laser sights sweeping methodically across the walls, multiple red dots dancing through darkness searching for targets to designate. Then came muzzle flashes, bright in the darkness as suppressed weapons fired controlled bursts. Bullets shredded furniture and walls, destroying the room where my son should have been sleeping peacefully. Or he would have died if he hadn't been researching Cold War tactics at his desk. I told everyone to get down below window level and accelerated hard, taking the corner at dangerous speed that made the tires squeal. Behind us, both SUV headlights blazed to life simultaneously and began aggressive pursuit. Sarah had her phone out trying to dial 911. but I told her they'd be gone long before police could respond and arrive on scene. This was professional military-style work, coordinated and lethal, planned and executed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. David had sent them, I was absolutely certain. I couldn't outrun them in a family vehicle that wasn't built for high-speed pursuit. And I definitely couldn't lead them on a dangerous chase through residential streets, endangering sleeping neighbors who had nothing to do with this situation. So I headed for an industrial area I knew intimately from security contracts we'd performed, yanked the wheel hard, and threaded through a construction zone, deliberately scattering orange barrels to create obstacles for the pursuing vehicles. I killed my headlights completely and took a sharp right into the industrial district, navigating by memory through warehouses, loading docks, and chain-link fencing, while the SUV headlights swept frantically through darkness, searching for us. I pulled behind a large loading dock and killed the engine completely. I rolled down all windows to listen for pursuit. I could hear footsteps on pavement, radio chatter between the hunters. Someone reported losing visual contact and said they were splitting up to search the area systematically. Emma whimpered softly in fear, and Sarah held her close, hand gently covering our daughter's mouth, not restricting her breathing but providing comfort and keeping her silent. Tommy was watching me intently, learning how to handle extreme crisis, understanding instinctively this wasn't the time for questions or conversation. My phone vibrated with an incoming text message. Jack's message said Agent Chen had reported an arrest warrant had been issued for David tonight based on the evidence they'd compiled. He must have gotten tipped off by someone inside law enforcement, probably Frank Pierce, the corrupt Port Authority official. Jack asked if we were safe. I typed one-handed that we were negative on safety, under active armed pursuit with my entire family in the vehicle, needed immediate extraction. His response came back in seconds, asking for precise coordinates. I sent our exact location. He replied 15 minutes maximum, stay alive until then. 15 minutes felt like an eternity when professional butchers were hunting you. Footsteps approached our concealed position from multiple directions. Through the Tahoe's side mirror, I saw a figure in tactical gear rounding the corner with weapon raised in ready position. I squeezed Sarah's hand once, a non-verbal signal we'd established years ago meaning stay ready for anything. The gunman swept methodically past our position, focused on searching other potential hiding spots and not seeing us in the shadows. I waited until he was 10 feet beyond us and his back was turned. Then I moved with purpose. I exited the vehicle silently, years of training making me a ghost who didn't disturb the air. The gunman never heard me coming from behind. My arm wrapped around his throat in a proper chokehold, applying precise pressure to the carotid artery while controlling his weapon arm. 7 seconds of sustained pressure, and he went limp and unconscious in my arms. I dragged him behind a nearby dumpster, taking his radio and weapon for myself, a nice expensive FN-57 that costs serious money. David wasn't being cheap with his hired butchers, which told me how threatened he felt. The radio crackled with someone reporting their section was clear. They were moving to search Area Charlie. I climbed back into the Tahoe and told my family quietly that the searchers were moving away from our position. We had a narrow window for escape. I started the engine and rolled slowly with headlights still off, using the building shadows for concealment. We emerged carefully onto an access road, just as a police cruiser turned the corner with lights flashing. Jack's doing, no doubt, calling in favors. I flashed my brights twice in the prearranged signal. The cruiser's full light bar came on, and suddenly we had an armed police escort. The SUVs wouldn't risk engaging marked police units directly because that would bring massive law enforcement response. We drove straight to the FBI field office downtown, where Agent Maria Chen was waiting outside despite the late hour. She was mid-40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much darkness in her career, but never stopped caring about protecting innocent people. She got us inside quickly through secure entrance and set my family up in a comfortable, safe area. While Sarah comforted Emma with quiet reassurances and Tommy gave an extremely detailed account to another agent, Chen laid out exactly what they knew about David's operation. David Walsh was the linchpin, the central coordinator in a major international arms trafficking operation they'd been investigating for 8 months. Tonight, they were finally moving to arrest him based on overwhelming evidence, but someone had tipped him off about the imminent warrant, almost certainly Frank Pierce, the corrupt Port Authority official who had every reason to warn his partner. David had panicked when he realized his empire was collapsing and decided to eliminate potential witnesses who could testify against him. starting with his business partner who had access, knowledge, and credibility that could destroy him. I said with cold anger that he'd sent professional butchers to homicide his own business partner and my innocent children. Chen nodded grimly and explained with brutal honesty that I was the ultimate liability in David's calculation. I had access to company records, knowledge of his activities, the kind of credibility that comes from a distinguished military service record. If I testified in federal court, I'd destroy David completely, and he knew it. She promised they'd catch David and prosecute him to the fullest extent of federal law. But I told her firmly that wouldn't be enough, not nearly enough. David had sent trained butchers to my home, tried to homicide my sleeping family, including 2 children. I'd seen men like David before during my intelligence career, men protected by expensive lawyers, political connections, and mountains of money. Even if law enforcement caught him, he might walk on technicalities or cut some sweetheart deal through legal maneuvering. I said I'd handle this situation my way, and all I needed from her was to keep my family safe while I worked. Chen warned she couldn't officially let me obstruct a federal investigation. I told her calmly she couldn't stop me either, and we both knew it. I'd spent 15 years in military intelligence doing things that would make David's arms trafficking operation look like amateur hour. He'd made this personal and brought my children into it. I knew who I really was underneath the security consultant facade I'd built, and David Walsh was about to discover what happens when you threaten a man who's been trained to eliminate threats. The FBI safe house was a nondescript rental property in Bellevue that looked like every other suburban house on the block. While Sarah tried maintaining some semblance of normalcy for Emma with morning cartoons and making breakfast, Tommy and I sat at the dining room table reviewing evidence with Chen and Jack, who'd arrived with additional intelligence. David's network was absolutely massive, stretching across 4 states and involving dozens of co-conspirators at every level. He'd been trafficking military-grade weapons to buyers in South America, Africa, and Eastern Europe for 3 years. The profits, nearly $40 million over that period, flowed through legitimate businesses, including my company that provided perfect cover. He'd systematically used our government credentials and security clearances to access secure facilities and move illegal cargo without raising immediate suspicion. But the real breakthrough came when David's wife Patricia showed up at the FBI office 3 days later looking devastated, but absolutely determined. She requested protection and said she was willing to testify against her husband despite the obvious personal cost. In the interview room with me watching through one-way glass, Patricia explained she hadn't known at first about David's criminal activities. He'd been charming and successful when they married 5 years ago, everything she'd wanted in a partner. But about 2 years back, he'd changed dramatically, more secretive, prone to angry outbursts, increasingly paranoid. He'd disappear for days with vague explanations about business travel. Patricia said she'd realized something was seriously wrong 6 months ago when she overheard a phone call in his home office. Ricardo Martinez had been threatening David about an intercepted weapons shipment. David promised angrily it wouldn't happen again and threatened consequences. She started investigating quietly on her own, copying files from his computer late at night, photographing documents. She assembled everything onto a flash drive that contained financial records, shell companies, names of everyone in his network, shipping manifests, everything needed to dismantle his operation. I entered the interview room and asked her directly why she was coming forward now instead of 6 months ago when she first discovered the truth. Patricia's voice broke with emotion as she explained that 3 nights earlier, she'd heard David on the phone in his study ordering my family eliminated. His exact words were, "The Davidsons know too much. Clean it up thoroughly, all of them, including the kids." That's when she finally accepted she'd married a genuine monster. She admitted she'd called 911 anonymously that night to report a credible threat to our address, which was all she could do without David discovering her betrayal. Over the next 2 days, we worked intensively with FBI analysts cross-referencing Patricia's data with their existing intelligence. The picture that emerged was absolutely staggering in scope. David's network involved corrupt port officials who altered shipping manifests, customs agents who looked the other way during inspections, warehouse operators who provided secure storage facilities. Frank Pierce had been David's primary enabler for years, altering official documents and misdirecting inspections in exchange for massive bribes. The whistleblower who died wasn't the first person eliminated. 2 other potential witnesses had suffered suspicious accidents in the past 18 months that were ruled accidental but showed classic hallmarks of professional elimination. But I knew we needed something even more devastating. Evidence so overwhelming David couldn't escape through legal technicalities. I focused on Saul Rios, David's personal attorney, who was also on the criminal payroll facilitating sophisticated money laundering through legal structures. If we could flip Rios to our side, we'd get direct testimony that David had personally ordered criminal activities with no possibility of deniability or blame shifting. Jack arranged through his contacts for me to accidentally encounter Rios leaving his downtown office building after a late meeting. I approached him directly in the parking garage and told him the FBI had his complete financial records, his communications, literally everything. He was next on the indictment list for conspiracy, money laundering, accessory to homicide. I pointed out he had a daughter at Stanford Medical School with a brilliant future ahead. If he went to federal prison, what happened to her tuition, her dreams, everything he'd built for her? I gave Rios exactly one option with no negotiation. Cooperate fully with the FBI, provide complete testimony against David in exchange for immunity from prosecution and witness protection. Otherwise, the deal expired, and he was on his own facing life imprisonment. 43 minutes later, Saul Rios walked into the FBI office and agreed to testify against his former client. But I knew David still had one dangerous card left to play. He had someone on the inside, someone in law enforcement feeding him information about the investigation. Tommy helped identify the mole, reviewing security footage Jack had obtained, and noticing a silver Honda Civic that appeared multiple times outside the FBI office at odd hours. The car belonged to Agent Jeffrey Wills, a junior investigator on Chen's team, who'd been present during every briefing and had access to all case files. David had gotten to Wills somehow, probably by offering desperately needed money to help pay for Wills's daughter's leukemia treatments that insurance wasn't covering. We decided to use Wills to set an elaborate trap. Chen announced they were moving David to federal court for arraignment the next morning. Fed Wills the false route and precise timing through an official briefing. The real secure transfer happened an hour earlier, through a completely different route. The decoy convoy with an armored vehicle and full security detail rolled out as planned on the route Wills had been given, and I rode in the follow car with Jack and 4 heavily armed FBI agents. David's people hit us exactly where I'd predicted at a railroad crossing with limited visibility. A semi-truck stalled across the tracks, blocking the convoy's forward movement. Before we could reverse and find an alternate route, 2 cargo vans pulled up behind us, boxing us in completely. 8 gunmen emerged with military body armor and automatic weapons, moving in coordinated fire teams. These were professional operators, not street thugs, but we were ready and waiting. The armored vehicle's hidden gun ports opened simultaneously, returning overwhelming suppressive fire. The supposedly stalled semi-truck revealed FBI marksmen who'd been hidden inside the cargo area. The vans found themselves surrounded by tactical teams that had been positioned an hour earlier. The gunfight lasted 90 intense seconds. When the shooting stopped, 6 attackers were in custody. 2 were dead, and none had escaped. The lead gunman was Ricardo Martinez himself, David's right-hand man and primary enforcer. When he saw FBI SWAT instead of an easy target, something broke completely in his confidence. Chen offered him a stark choice in the back of a federal vehicle. Testify against everyone in the organization and get relocated with a new identity through witness protection, or face life in federal prison where David's people would eventually eliminate him for failing the rescue mission. Martinez agreed to testify and provide evidence. David's trial opened on a cold November morning. The federal courtroom was crowded with reporters, onlookers, and people whose lives he had wrecked. My family and I sat in the section reserved for sufferers. Tommy wore a suit that made him seem older than 14. Emma stayed home with Sarah's sister. She was too young to face what was coming. Sarah held my hand and didn't let go. When they brought David in wearing an orange jumpsuit and cuffs, he looked small and stripped of the polished image he once wore like armor. His eyes met mine across the room. For a moment, I saw the friend I once trusted, but that was long gone. Now we were just enemies. Destroyer and survivor. The prosecution hit hard. Their case was airtight. 3 years of illegal arms deals, $40 million in dirty profits, ordered eliminatings, a plot to wipe out my entire family, bribes across multiple agencies. Patricia told the court how she found out what he'd done and heard him calmly order our deaths. Saul Rios broke down how David hid blood money through clever laundering. Ricardo Martinez described the homicides David ordered, the weapons he moved, the structure he built. Frank Pierce admitted to taking almost $2 million in bribes. On day 16, I took the stand. I told the story piece by piece, how I found the missing money. The night-armed men came for us, how laser sights swept Tommy's room, how bullets shredded the place where my son should have been asleep. David's lawyer came at me hard on cross. He hinted I'd broken the law myself. I explained how I'd only fought back when attacked. I reminded him I'd given Rios a legal way out to save his daughter. I worked with the FBI by the book. I stared the man down and asked if he really thought I should have stood by while hired butchers hunted my children. Then David made a fatal mistake. Against his lawyer's advice, he testified. He claimed dangerous people forced him to cooperate, said he never wanted anyone hurt, but the jury heard the recordings, David's own voice ordering them to clean it up, kids included. His lies crumbled fast. The jury was out for just 4 hours, guilty on all 37 counts. His face went pale. Patricia cried. Sarah squeezed my hand. Tommy gave a single nod. Justice had landed. 2 weeks later, sentencing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, told David he'd had everything: money, power, family, and traded it for greed. Worse, he'd tried to eliminate children to cover it up. She sentenced him to life with no parole, plus another 145 years. David Walsh would die in prison. 6 months passed. I stood in our new Guardian Solutions office on the 10th floor downtown, looking out over Puget Sound. Jack ran the day-to-day. Chen retired from the FBI to work with us as security lead. We'd already taken 15 cases. Whistleblowers under threat, families hunted by gangs, journalists digging into human trafficking who needed protection. Tommy started high school stronger and more sure of himself. Therapy helped him work through the trauma. Emma bounced back with a child's resilience. She still checked locks at night, but she laughed again. David's appeals were denied. He sat in a supermax cell in Colorado, forgotten. Martinez got a new life in witness protection. Pierce got 15 years for helping. Rios moved to Montana, his daughter in med school with her future secure. Patricia remarried and sent me a Christmas card thanking me for giving her a second chance. Then came the call from Army Intelligence. They wanted Guardian Solutions for missions overseas, legal, funded, and aimed at saving lives. I talked with Sarah. She said she understood who I was, a protector. "Just come home," she told me. 3 months later, we pulled off our first international mission, rescuing an aid worker from a war zone without firing a shot. Tommy now trains seriously in self-defense. He wants to follow my path. I told him to be better, to avoid the hard choices I've had to make, to know the line between justice and revenge. One night, Emma drew a picture of our family. In it, I stood tall between them and dark shapes in the background. It was simple, but it said everything. I tucked her in and promised the danger was gone. Later, Sarah and I stood on the porch under the stars. She raised her mug and toasted, "To second chances, to justice, to family." I echoed her words and meant them. Somewhere in Colorado, David stares at blank walls and thinks about the empire he built and lost. But none of that matters now. His power is gone. He's just another inmate waiting for the end. Me? I'm building something real, something worth protecting. The war is over. We won, and the future is wide open.